I'm Angela Kim, 58, a first-generation immigrant who built a $3.2 million fortune through decades of sacrifice and 16-hour workdays. Last Thanksgiving, when I served traditional dumplings alongside turkey, my eldest daughter rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, stop acting so Asian, we're American now." The words cut deeper than any blade. But what my children didn't know was that their casual cruelty would cost them everything I'd worked to give them. 3 months later, I made a decision that would change our family forever and honor the heritage they were so ashamed of. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt caught between two worlds, or had your identity dismissed by those you love most, like this video to hear how one mother's quiet act of justice became her greatest gift to herself. The silence that followed Sarah's words felt like drowning. I stood there in my own dining room, holding a serving spoonful of mandu dumplings I had risen at 5 in the morning to make by hand, the way my mother taught me 40 years ago. The same recipe written on a yellowed index card in her careful Korean script, now tucked safely in my kitchen drawer like a sacred relic. Stop acting so Asian. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched my daughter's friends nod in agreement, their faces showing that particular American discomfort with anything too foreign, too authentic. Sarah had learned to mirror that expression perfectly. I remember the exact moment I first stepped off the plane at LAX in 1985, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and 3 small children. Sarah was only 7 then, Michael 4, and Jennifer barely 2. They clung to my skirt as we navigated the chaos of the airport, their wide eyes taking in this new world that would become their home. Back then, Sarah would beg me to tell her stories about Korea, about her grandmother who made the best kimchi in our village, about the mountains that turned gold in autumn, that little girl who once proudly wore the hanbok I brought from Seoul. To her, school's cultural day had grown into a woman who couldn't bear to be seen as anything other than generically American. Somewhere along the way, I had failed her, or perhaps she had failed me. The weight of building our life in America had consumed everything. Those early years were a blur of night shifts cleaning office buildings while my children slept, studying English from library books during their nap times, saving every penny to move us out of that cramped apartment in Korea. I worked 16-hour days so they could attend better schools, learn perfect English, have opportunities I never dreamed of. But in giving them America, I had somehow lost Korea. And now, standing in my beautiful home, the one I bought and paid for with calloused hands and an aching back, my own daughter was telling me to stop being who I was. The other guests shifted uncomfortably as I set down the serving spoon and walked quietly to the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could hear Sarah explaining to her friends that I got a little carried away with the ethnic food sometimes, her voice carrying that apologetic tone I'd grown to recognize whenever she had to acknowledge my existence in public. I stared at that recipe card, my mother's handwriting blurred through sudden tears. She had warned me about this, hadn't she? "Don't let America make you forget who you are, Angela," she had said the night before I left Seoul. "Your children will only be as proud of their heritage as you teach them to be." I had failed her. I had failed all of us. The framed business license hanging in my home office tells a story my children have never bothered to ask about. Kim Cleaning Services EST, 1987. Those simple words represent 2 years of sleepless nights, aching knees, and a determination that burned brighter than any exhaustion. I started with a bucket, a mop, and a borrowed vacuum cleaner. Mrs. Chen, from down the hall, had connections to office buildings downtown that needed night cleaning crews. The work was hard, invisible, and paid poorly, but it was honest work that let me be home when my children woke up. Every night at 10 p.m., I would kiss 3 sleeping foreheads and drive my rusty Honda Civic to downtown Los Angeles. Office after office, floor after floor, I cleaned the messes of people who would never see my face or know my name. I scrubbed toilets, emptied trash cans, and vacuumed carpets while studying real estate magazines I found in the waiting rooms. But patterns fascinated me. Which neighborhoods were growing? Which buildings were being renovated? Where the money was flowing? I may have been cleaning offices, but I was getting an education in American capitalism that no business school could provide. By 1990, I had saved enough to hire 2 other Korean women and bid on larger contracts. By 1993, I owned 3 buildings myself, purchasing them with cash earned from cleaning similar buildings for other people. The irony wasn't lost on me. I bought my first investment property with money I made, scrubbing its floors at night. Real estate became my language, my path to the American dream. While my children slept safely in their beds, I learned about cap rates, cash flow, and market analysis. I studied neighborhoods like a scholar, predicting gentrification before the word became trendy. Koreatown, Echo Park, Silver Lake. I bought property in these areas when they were still rough around the edges, when other investors turned their noses up. The 16-hour days nearly broke me. Cleaning at night, managing properties during the day, raising 3 children as a single mother. Their father had left when Jennifer was 3, unable to handle the pressure of starting over in a foreign country. I never spoke poorly of him to the children, but I also never forgot that he chose the easy path while I chose the necessary one. Teaching myself English through lease agreements and property law books, I discovered I had a gift for seeing potential where others saw problems. That run-down apartment building in Echo Park, I saw families who needed affordable housing and an opportunity to build equity. The small office complex I saw Korean American businesses that needed a landlord who understood their struggles. By the time Sarah graduated high school, I owned 12 properties across Los Angeles. By the time Jennifer finished college, my portfolio was worth over $2 million. The woman who once cleaned office buildings now owned them. But success came with a price I hadn't anticipated. The more American I became in business, the more distant I grew from Korea. The 16-hour workdays left no time for Korean community events, no energy for maintaining friendships with other immigrants, no space for preserving the cultural traditions that once defined me. The stack of private school tuition receipts in my filing cabinet tells the story of my children's golden childhood I could never have imagined for myself. Harvard, Westlake, USC, Stanford, each payment representing months of my labor, each check a piece of my dreams transferred to their futures. Sarah, my eldest, now goes by her American name exclusively. She was born Park Soo-jin, named after my mother's sister who died too young, but somewhere between kindergarten and high school, Soo-jin disappeared entirely. Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Stanford Law and now works at a prestigious downtown firm, specializing in corporate mergers. She drives a BMW, lives in a Marina del Rey heiress, and has never once mentioned her Korean heritage to her colleagues. I learned this accidentally when I attended her company's holiday party 3 years ago. I watched her introduce me to her. Bafta is simply my mother, with no context, no backstory, no acknowledgement of how she got to where she was. When her boss asked what I did for a living, Sarah quickly changed the subject. Later, I overheard her tell a colleague that I was in property management, which was technically true but stripped of any mention of cleaning floors or the immigrant struggle that built our wealth. Michael Myson works on Wall Street for an investment firm. At 29, he earns more in a year than I made in my first decade in America. He's brilliant with numbers, has his father's sharp mind for business, and speaks English with the flawless accent of American privilege. He also changed his name from Kim Min-jun to Michael. Kimond has never corrected anyone who assumes he's adopted. I discovered this particular shame during a family dinner 2 years ago when he brought his girlfriend home. She was a lovely, blonde woman from Connecticut who asked innocent questions about our family history. Michael deflected each one with practiced ease, mentioning difficult circumstances and complicated family background without ever saying the word Korea. When she complimented the bulgogi I had prepared, Michael actually winced and suggested we order pizza instead. Jennifer, my youngest at 25, might be the most successful at erasing her heritage. She works in marketing for a tech company, lives in San Francisco, and has mastered the art of being effortlessly American. She's the one who suggested I stop speaking Korean around her friends because it makes people uncomfortable. She's also the one who refuses to eat Korean food in public, claiming it's too spicy or too weird. Despite growing up on kimchi and rice, all 3 attended the best schools money could buy, private elementary schools in Beverly Hills where they were often the only Korean children in their classes, elite high schools where they learned to navigate wealth and privilege as if they were born to it, top-tier universities where they shed the last vestiges of their Korean identity like outgrown clothes. I paid for SAT tutors, college counselors, and summer programs that cost more than my first car. I bought them everything they needed to succeed in America. Perfect teeth, perfect English, perfect credentials. I gave them every advantage I never had, every opportunity I could only dream of. But somewhere in all that giving, In all that striving to make them perfectly American, I lost them. They became so good at being American that they forgot where they came from. They became so successful at fitting in that they couldn't bear to stand out. They became so accomplished at being everything I wanted them to be that they stopped being who they were. The saddest part is that they see this transformation as success. They believe they've won the American dream, not realizing they've lost their souls in the process. The Korean language textbooks, gathering dust on my bookshelf, represent one of my greatest failures as a mother. I bought them in 1995, when Sarah was 17 and still occasionally spoke Korean with me. I had grand plans of weekend lessons, of teaching all 3 children to read and write in their mother tongue, of preserving the language that connected them to generations of ancestors. Those books never made it past the first chapter. "Mom, why do we need to learn Korean?" Michael had asked during our first and only lesson. "We live in America now. We should focus on being American." I should have insisted. I should have made it non-negotiable, the way piano lessons and tennis lessons were non-negotiable. But I was tired from working double shifts, and their resistance felt like just another battle I didn't have the energy to fight. So I let it go, telling myself we'd try again next month, next year, when things were less hectic. Next year never came. The cultural erosion happened so gradually that I barely noticed it at first. Sarah stopped asking me to pack kimchi in her school lunches after some classmates made faces. Michael declined to participate in Korean Cultural Day at his elementary school, claiming he had nothing interesting to share. Jennifer learned to roll her eyes whenever I spoke Korean on the phone with my friends. Family celebrations became increasingly awkward affairs. Korean New Year, once a sacred tradition of respect and renewal, became something to endure rather than celebrate. I would prepare traditional foods, set up the ancestral altar, and wait for my children to bow respectfully to their grandparents' memory. Instead, I got complaints about having to dress up, grumbling about weird traditions, and eventually, complete absence. "Do we have to do this Korean stuff every year?" Jennifer asked when she was 16, standing in my living room in jeans and a t-shirt, while I wore my most beautiful hanbok. "None of my friends have to do this," I tried to explain, the importance of honoring our ancestors, of remembering where we came from. I told her about her great-grandmother who survived the Japanese occupation, about her grandfather who built schools with his bare hands, about the strength and dignity of our people. She listened with the polite patience of someone waiting for an embarrassing relative to finish talking. Their friends never knew they were Korean. Over the years, I watched my children introduce me to their social circles with carefully neutral language. "This is my mom" became the standard phrase, with no context, no cultural background, no story of immigration or struggle. I became just another American suburban mother, indistinguishable from all the others except for my accent, which they constantly encouraged me to work on. The most painful moments came during holidays when their friends' families would share stories about their Italian grandmothers, or Irish traditions, or Jewish heritage. My children would sit silently, offering nothing about their own rich cultural background, as if Korea didn't exist, as if they had materialized out of thin air into American middle-class comfort. I began to lose my Korean gradually too. Without anyone to speak it with regularly, my vocabulary started to shrink. I would catch myself thinking in English first, translating Korean phrases in my head before I could remember the exact words. When I called my few remaining friends in Seoul, they commented on how my Korean was becoming Americanized, peppered with English words and American sentence structures. By the time my children were adults, we had created a household where Korea was a secret shame, something to be hidden rather than celebrated. The Thanksgiving menu I had written in both Korean and English sat on my kitchen counter like evidence of my foolish hope. Traditional turkey and stuffing alongside galbatang and pajin, east meeting west on one table. I had spent 3 days preparing, wanting to create a meal that honored both cultures, that showed my children how beautifully their heritage could blend with their American life. Sarah arrived first with her boyfriend, a tall man named Brad who worked in finance. I watched her eyes scan the table, taking inventory of what might embarrass her. The moment she saw the mandu arranged carefully on my mother's ceramic platter, her expression tightened. "Mom, you made dumplings?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular tone of exasperation I'd grown to dread. "We talked about this. Brad doesn't really like ethnic food." I wanted to remind her that she had grown up on these dumplings, that they were as much a part of her childhood as birthday cakes and Christmas cookies. Instead, I smiled and suggested Brad might enjoy trying something new. Michael and Jennifer arrived together, and I could see them exchanging glances as they took in the spread. Jennifer immediately gravitated toward the American dishes, pointedly avoiding the Korean side of the table. Michael made polite conversation about work, but I noticed how he steered Brad away from asking questions about the unfamiliar dishes. The breaking point came when Brad, trying to be polite, asked about the dumplings. I began explaining how they were made by hand, how the recipe came from my mother, how in Korea we believe that food made with love carries the cook's heart to the people who eat it. That's when Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically and said, "Those words that would change everything. Mom, stop acting so Asian. We're American now." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye in the room on me, Brad looking uncomfortable, Michael staring at his plate, Jennifer nodding in agreement with her sister. But it was the casual cruelty in Sarah's voice that cut deepest, the way she said it as if being Asian was something shameful, something to be suppressed and hidden. I set down my serving spoon and walked to the kitchen, my hands shaking. Through the doorway, I could hear Sarah explaining to Brad that I sometimes got carried away with the cultural stuff, her voice bright and apologetic, as if she were making excuses for a child who had misbehaved. I stared at that menu, my careful handwriting in 2 languages blurring through tears. 38 years in America, and I was still too Korean for my own children. I had given them everything: education, opportunities, wealth, and they couldn't even let me be myself at my own table. For the first time in decades, I understood what my mother meant when she warned me about losing myself in pursuit of the American dream. I had succeeded in giving my children America, but I had failed to give them pride in who they were. Worse, I had taught them to be ashamed of who I was. Sleep abandoned me completely after Thanksgiving. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, Sarah's words echoing in my mind like a broken record. "Stop acting so Asian." The phrase had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter, growing more painful each time I remembered her dismissive tone. At 3 a.m., I gave up pretending to sleep and pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. Writing in Korean felt like coming home after a long exile. The characters flowed from my pen with surprising ease, muscle memory overriding decades of neglect. I wrote about the hurt, about the shame of being rejected by my own children, about the slow realization that I had lost myself somewhere in the pursuit of their acceptance. I sacrificed my identity so they could have theirs. I wrote in Korean, the words feeling more honest than anything I'd said aloud in years. But what kind of identity did I give them, if it requires erasing their mother? The notebook became my confessional, filled with thoughts too raw to share with anyone. I wrote about the loneliness of success, about how my beautiful house felt empty of culture and warmth. I wrote about my mother's warnings, about the phone calls from Seoul that grew fewer each year as I became more American and less Korean. Most painfully, I wrote about the gradual erosion of my own cultural identity. When had I stopped listening to Korean music? When had I stopped reading Korean newspapers? When had I started thinking in English first, my native language becoming secondary in my own mind? During the day, I went through the motions of normal life, managing properties, paying bills, maintaining the empire I had built. But at night, with only my Korean journal for company, I confronted the truth I'd been avoiding for years. My children weren't just embarrassed by my Korean culture. They were embarrassed by me. The successful American businessman they introduced to their friends wasn't the real me. The real me was the woman who still dreamed in Korean, who missed the sound of temple bells, who remembered every traditional recipe my mother had taught me. The real me was someone my children had never bothered to know, someone they actively discouraged me from being. I began to question everything. What did I owe children who saw my heritage as a burden? What legacy was I leaving if it came with the condition that I hide who I truly was? My mother had built schools in Korea with her bare hands. What had I built besides wealth that would go to people who were ashamed of where it came from? The answer came to me slowly, written in Korean characters across pages of late-night confessions. I had built nothing of real value if it required me to disappear in the process. The letter from Seoul Children's Educational Foundation arrived on a Tuesday morning in December, addressed to me in careful Korean script. I hadn't been on their mailing list, hadn't donated before, but somehow they had found me. Inside were photographs of children studying by candlelight, essays written in Korean about dreams of becoming doctors and teachers, and a gentle request for support. These children have so much potential, the letter read, but lack the resources to pursue higher education. Your help could change their entire future. Looking at those photographs, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine gratitude, hope, and pride in being Korean. These children weren't ashamed of their heritage, they were trying to build on it, to honor it through education and achievement. I called the foundation that afternoon, my Korean rusty, but surprisingly intact. The woman who answered, Mrs. Park, spoke with the kind of warmth I remembered from my childhood. We talked for over an hour about the children, their needs, their dreams. She told me about young people who walked miles to school, who studied by streetlight because their families couldn't afford electricity, who saw education as a way to lift not just themselves but their entire communities. Many Korean Americans forget about the homeland, Mrs. Park said gently, but you calling today tells me you remember where you came from. The conversation awakened something in me that had been dormant for decades. I had forgotten the Korean concept of nunsita, art of understanding others' feelings and needs, without being told. I had forgotten about jengda, deep emotional connections that bind communities together. I had forgotten about the Korean belief that individual success means nothing without lifting others up. That evening, I called my childhood friend Myung in Seoul, someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The conversation was awkward at first, my Korean peppered with English words and American idioms. But as we talked, the language came back to me like muscle memory. Angela, she said, using my Korean name, you sound lost. What happened to the girl who is going to conquer America, and then come back to help Korea? I had no answer. Somewhere in the pursuit of American success, I had forgotten my original dream, not just to succeed in America, but to use that success to help others, particularly those in Korea who shared my heritage. That night, I researched Korean educational charities, orphanages, and scholarship programs. I discovered organizations building schools, funding university educations, and supporting young entrepreneurs. The contrast was stark. In Korea, my money could transform lives, fund dreams, and create lasting change. In America, it would simply make my already privileged children more privileged. My attorney, David Morrison, had handled my legal affairs for 15 years. He knew every property I owned, every investment I'd made, every financial decision that had built my $3.2 million empire. What he didn't know was why I had suddenly requested a complete portfolio review and wanted to discuss estate planning options. Angela, this is quite comprehensive, he said, spreading documents across his mahogany conference table. 12 properties in Los Angeles, investment accounts, business holdings, life insurance policies. Your current will leaves everything divided equally among Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer. Are you looking to make minor adjustments? I took a deep breath. I want to change everything. His pen stopped moving. Everything. I want to establish a foundation. The Angela Kim Educational Foundation. I want my entire estate to go toward funding education for children in Korea, scholarships, school construction, teacher training programs. David set down his pen and studied my face carefully. That's a significant change, Angela. Have you discussed this with your children? My children have made it clear they're embarrassed by their Korean heritage. They've spent their entire adult lives distancing themselves from Korea, from me, from everything I am. Why should money earned through Korean immigrant labor go to people who are ashamed of being Korean? But they're your children, David said gently. And this is a substantial inheritance we're talking about. Are you sure you want to disinherit them completely? I pulled out my notebook, the one filled with Korean writing from those sleepless nights. Let me ask you something, David. If your children were ashamed of being Jewish, if they changed their names to hide their heritage, if they told you to stop acting so Jewish, would you feel obligated to leave them your fortune? He was quiet. For a long moment. I see your point. This money came from Korean values: hard work, sacrifice, respect for education, lifting up your community. My children have rejected those values. They've rejected me. I want my legacy to go to people who will honor it. David walked me through the legal requirements, the tax implications, the process of establishing a charitable foundation. He warned me about potential challenges for my children, about the emotional fallout, about the finality of the decision. Once this is done, it's very difficult to undo, he cautioned. Are you absolutely certain? I thought about those photographs of Korean children studying by candlelight, about their essays full of hope and determination. I thought about my mother's words about not losing yourself in America. I thought about Sarah's dismissive voice. Stop acting so Asian. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Before making my final decision, I decided to give my children one last chance. During our monthly family dinner in January, I casually mentioned that I'd been thinking about my legacy, about what really mattered to me as I got older. I've been connecting with some Korean organizations, I said, watching their faces carefully. There are so many opportunities to help children in Korea get educations they couldn't otherwise afford. Sarah immediately looked uncomfortable. Mom, you're not thinking of giving money to those overseas charities, are you? You know how many of them are scams. These are legitimate organizations, I replied. I've done my research. Michael set down his fork. Mom, if you're worried about charity, there are plenty of good causes here in America. Why send money to Korea when there are problems to solve right here? I studied my son's face. Here was a man who worked on Wall Street, who understood international markets and global investments, suddenly concerned about keeping charity local when it meant his inheritance might go to Korea. Because Korea is part of who I am, I said simply. Part of who you are too. Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, we're American. We were born here. We grew up here. We live here. Korea is just some place you came from. It's not really our heritage. Not our heritage. I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Your grandparents are buried in Korean soil. Your great-grandmother survived the Japanese occupation. Your cultural DNA is Korean. How is that not your heritage? That's ancient history, Sarah said dismissively. We need to focus on being American, on building our lives here. All this Korea stuff is it's just backward-looking. The conversation continued in this vein for another hour. Every time I mentioned Korean culture, Korean values, or Korean causes, my children found ways to redirect the conversation back to American priorities. Michael suggested I focus on making smart investments instead of throwing money away on sentimentality. Jennifer recommended I enjoy retirement rather than getting caught up in ethnic politics. The most telling moment came when I mentioned visiting Korea to see some of the educational programs in person. Sarah actually looked alarmed. Mom, you're not serious about going back there, are you? What if something happens to you? What if you get sick? Their healthcare system isn't like ours. It was clear that my children saw Korea not as a homeland to honor, but as a threat to their American identity and their financial future. They had failed my test completely. The plane touched down at Incheon Airport on a gray February morning, and I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 30 years. Korea welcomed me back not with fanfare, but with the quiet familiarity of home. Mrs. Park, from the Educational Foundation, met me at the airport, her warm smile instantly recognizable from our phone conversations. During the hour-long drive to Seoul, I watched the landscape blur past modern skyscrapers rising beside traditional Hanak houses, ancient and new existing side by side in a way my children had never learned to appreciate. We're so honored you came, Mrs. Park said in Korean. The children have prepared something special for you. The Seoul Children's Educational Center occupied a modest building in Gangnam, far from the glittering shopping districts tourists knew. Inside, I found something that took my breath away. 43 children, ages 8 to 17, studying with an intensity and gratitude I hadn't seen since my own childhood. They had prepared a presentation about their dreams. Young Min wanted to become a doctor to help rural communities. 12-year-old So Young hoped to study engineering and build better schools. Teenage Genesio dreamed of becoming a teacher like his grandfather, who had educated 3 generations in their village. Each child stood and bowed respectfully, speaking clearly about their goals, their families, their hopes for the future. Not one of them seemed embarrassed by their Korean identity. Not one of them wanted to be anything other than Korean. After the presentation, they presented me with handmade thank you cards, each one decorated with careful Korean calligraphy and drawings of their families, their schools, their dreams. The messages were simple but profound. Thank you for believing in Korean children. Your kindness gives us hope. We will make you proud of Korean students. I broke down crying. Here were children who had so little but gave so much respect, so much gratitude, so much pride in their heritage. The contrast with my own children was overwhelming. That evening, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since her funeral, 8 years ago. I knelt in the traditional way, bowing 3 times, and spoke to her in Korean about my failures and my revelations. "Iyama," I whispered, "I lost our children to America, but maybe I can help Korea's children instead." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment, I felt her presence, felt her approval. I had spent decades trying to give my children everything, but I had forgotten the Korean principle that true success means lifting up your community, not just yourself. Flying back to Los Angeles 3 days later, I carried with me those thank you cards and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Back in David's office, I placed the Korean children's thank you cards on his conference table next to my financial documents. The contrast was stark: millions of dollars in assets beside simple cards decorated with crayon drawings and heartfelt messages in Korean. "I want to finalize everything," I told him. The Angela Kim Educational Foundation, named after my mother, Kim Jung-suk. I want every penny to go toward education in Korea: scholarships, school construction, teacher training programs. David reviewed the documents carefully. "I've drawn up the foundation paperwork as you requested. The structure ensures the money will be managed properly, with oversight from both American and Korean educational authorities." "But Angela, I have to ask one more time, are you absolutely certain about disinheriting your children completely?" I picked up one of the cards, from a 10-year-old girl named Haewon who wanted to become a nurse. Her drawing showed a woman in a white coat helping sick people, with Korean text that read, "Thank you for helping me dream bigger." "David, let me tell you what I learned in Korea. I met children who walk 2 hours to school each day, who study by candlelight because their families can't afford electricity, who see education as the greatest gift they could receive. They bowed to me, thanked me, treated me with the respect Korean culture teaches. They weren't embarrassed by being Korean, they were proud of it." I set the card down gently. "My children have never once thanked me for their education. They've never bowed respectfully to me, never shown gratitude for the sacrifices I made. They've spent their entire adult lives trying to erase their Korean identity, and now they expect to inherit money that came from Korean values they reject." "The legal structure is solid," David said, reviewing the documents again. "The foundation will be established in both countries, with clear guidelines for how funds are distributed. Your children could potentially challenge the will, but given your mental competency and the detailed documentation of your reasoning, they would have a very difficult case." I signed each document carefully, my name in both English and Korean characters. With each signature, I felt lighter, as if I were finally aligning my actions with my values. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want you to prepare a letter explaining my decision. I want my children to understand that this isn't about punishment, it's about integrity. I want them to know that I'm proud to be Korean, and I'm giving my legacy to people who share that pride." David nodded. "I'll draft something for your review." As I left his office, I felt the weight of 30 years of compromise lifting from my shoulders. Korean New Year fell on a Saturday in late January. I spent the entire week preparing, buying ingredients for traditional foods, cleaning my house according to Korean customs, setting up the ancestral altar with photographs of my parents and grandparents. I wrote careful invitations in both Korean and English asking my children to join me for this important celebration. The invitation explained the significance of Seollal, how it's a time for families to honor their ancestors, share traditional foods, and begin the year with gratitude and respect. I included the schedule, bowing ceremony at sunrise, traditional breakfast, games, and storytelling about our family history. Sarah called first. "Mom, this Korean New Year thing, do we really have to do all the bowing and the weird food? Can't we just have a normal family dinner?" Michael's response was even more dismissive. "I've got plans that weekend, but maybe I can stop by for an hour if you really need me to." Jennifer didn't call at all. She sent a text. "Working all weekend. Can't make it to the ethnic stuff. Maybe next time." Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. I woke at 5 a.m., put on my most beautiful hanbok deep blue silk with gold embroidery that my mother had given me before I left Korea. I prepared the altar carefully, arranging offerings of fruit, rice cakes, and tea. At sunrise, I performed the traditional baas alone, speaking to my ancestors in Korean, telling them about my children's absence, asking for their guidance. The silence in my house was deafening. At 10 a.m., Sarah arrived wearing jeans and a sweater, looking irritated. "Mom, you're really dressed up. This is a bit much, don't you think?" "It's our most important holiday," I said in Korean, then repeated in English when she gave me a blank look. "In Korea, families gather to honor Mom. Please don't start with the Korea lectures." I came. "Okay, that should be enough." Michael showed up an hour later, checked his phone constantly, and declined to try any of the traditional foods I'd spent days preparing. When I asked him to participate in the ceremony honoring our ancestors, he literally laughed. "Mom, you know I don't believe in that superstitious stuff. Can't we just eat and catch up like normal people?" Jennifer never came. I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by beautiful traditional foods, wearing silk that connected me to generations of Korean women, celebrating the most important holiday of my culture in complete solitude. My children had made their choice clear. They would rather erase their heritage entirely than spend one day honoring it. That evening, I called David and asked him to schedule the family meeting to reveal my decision. I called the family meeting for the following Sunday, telling my children I wanted to discuss important family financial matters. They arrived at my house with barely concealed excitement, probably expecting news about early inheritance distributions or investment opportunities. Sarah brought a legal pad, ready to take notes. Michael wore his best business suit, as if this were a corporate presentation. Jennifer actually showed up on time for once, her phone tucked away, a sure sign she thought money was involved. "Thank you all for coming," I said, settling into my chair at the head of the dining table. "I wanted to talk to you about my will and what will happen to my estate when I die." "Finally," Sarah said, uncapping her pen. "We've been wondering about your estate planning. With your portfolio being so substantial, there are probably some tax strategies we should consider." I pulled out the sealed envelope David had prepared. "Actually, I've already finalized my estate planning. I wanted you to hear about it directly from me." The room fell silent. 3 pairs of eyes focused on me with sudden intensity. "I've established the Angela Kim Educational Foundation," I continued, my voice steady. "My entire estate, $3.2 million, all 12 properties, all investments and accounts, will go to fund education for children in Korea." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you just say?" "I'm leaving everything to Korean educational charities. Nothing will go to any of you." Michael's face went white. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is our inheritance. We're your children. Yes, you're my children. But you've made it clear that you're ashamed of being Korean children. You've spent your entire adult lives rejecting your heritage, telling me to stop acting so Asian, refusing to participate in Korean traditions or culture." Jennifer found her voice. "This is insane. You can't just give away millions of dollars because we don't want to eat weird food or do your ethnic ceremonies." "This isn't about food or ceremonies," I said calmly. "This is about respect, about gratitude, about honoring where you came from. I built this wealth using Korean values: hard work, sacrifice, education, lifting up your community. You've rejected those values, so I'm giving my wealth to people who embrace them." Sarah stood up abruptly, her legal training kicking in. "We'll contest this. You can't disinherit us for something so trivial." "It's not trivial to me," I replied. "And according to my attorney, my decision is legally sound." The explosion of anger that followed was immediate and volcanic. The text messages started within an hour of my children leaving my house. My phone buzzed constantly with their rage, desperation, and increasingly frantic attempts to manipulate me into changing my mind. From Sarah, "This is emotional blackmail. You can't punish us for wanting to be American. Call me immediately." From Michael, "Mom, let's be rational about this. I understand you're upset, but destroying our financial future won't solve anything. We need to talk." From Jennifer, "I can't believe you would do this to your own children. What kind of mother are you? This is sick." The messages continued throughout the week, escalating in tone and desperation. Sarah threatened legal action, demanding I undergo psychological evaluation to prove my competency. Michael sent detailed financial projections showing how my irrational decision would impact his children's college funds. Jennifer alternated between tearful guilt trips and vicious personal attacks. But it was the voicemail from Sarah on Thursday that revealed their true priorities. Her lawyer voice had cracked, replaced by something raw and desperate. "Mom, we'll do whatever you want. We'll eat Korean food. We'll learn Korean words. We'll celebrate your holidays. Just please don't take away our inheritance. We need that money. I played that message 3 times, each word confirming what I already knew. They weren't offering to respect my culture because they understood its value. They were bargaining with cultural performance to secure their financial future. They still saw Korean identity as a transaction, something to trade for money, rather than something to embrace with pride. The most telling response came from Michael's wife, who called me directly. "Angela, I don't understand why you're doing this. The kids have always been respectful to you. Just because they don't want to do traditional Korean things doesn't mean they don't love you." "Respectful?" I asked. "Your husband told me to stop acting so Asian at my own dinner table. Is that respectful?" She was quiet for a moment. "Well, maybe they could have said it differently, but you have to understand they're trying to fit in here. Being too ethnic makes things harder for them professionally." That conversation crystallized everything. My children and their spouses' Korean identity as a professional liability, something that needed to be managed and minimized. They wanted the financial benefits of my Korean work ethic while rejecting the cultural identity that created those values. My phone rang constantly, but I stopped answering. My decision was final, and their desperate attempts to negotiate only confirmed I had made the right choice. News of my decision spread through the Korean American community faster than I had anticipated. Mrs. Park from the Seoul Children's Educational Foundation had shared the news with other Korean organizations, and within days, I was receiving calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The Korean Community Center of Los Angeles featured my story in their monthly newsletter, with the headline, "Local Businesswoman Honors Heritage Through Educational Foundation." The article described my journey from cleaning lady to successful real estate investor, and praised my commitment to supporting Korean education despite being estranged from family members who had lost connection to their cultural roots. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Korean church leaders called to thank me. Other first-generation immigrants shared their own stories of children who had rejected their heritage. Business owners in Koreatown invited me to community events I hadn't attended in decades. "You did what many of us only dream of doing," said Mr. Cho, who owned a successful restaurant chain. "Our children take everything we built and give nothing back to the community. You showed them that our culture has value." The American reaction was more mixed. Some of Sarah's colleagues at her law firm had heard about the situation, and she complained bitterly that people were gossiping about our family drama at work. Michael's boss apparently made a comment about cultural conflicts in immigrant families, which mortified him. David confirmed that my will was legally bulletproof. They consulted with 3 different attorneys, he told me during one of our monthly check-ins. All 3 firms told them the same thing: "You're mentally competent. You have the right to distribute your assets as you choose," and their case for challenging the will would be virtually impossible to win. The Korean media picked up the story when Mrs. Park announced the establishment of the Angela Kim Educational Foundation at a press conference in Seoul. Korean television interviewed some of the scholarship recipients, showing their gratitude and dedication to their studies. One young woman, studying to become a teacher, said in perfect Korean, "Mrs. Kim shows us that successful people don't forget their responsibility to help others. She is a true Korean mother to all of us." Watching that interview online, I cried, for the first time in months, but these were tears of pride, not sadness. These young people understood something my own children never had, that success without service to your community is empty achievement. For the first time in decades, I felt truly connected to my Korean identity, surrounded by people who valued what I valued and respected what I had accomplished. 6 months after revealing my decision, I found myself wearing my mother's wedding ring for the first time since her funeral. The simple gold band felt right on my finger, a tangible connection to generations of Korean women who had faced impossible choices with quiet dignity. My house, once echoing with the silence of cultural suppression, now filled regularly with the sounds of Korean conversation. I had joined 3 Korean organizations, volunteered to teach Korean language classes at the community center, and reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my years of focused assimilation. The loneliness that had plagued me for decades had been replaced by something I hadn't felt since childhood: belonging. I belonged to a community that valued my contributions, respected my identity, and shared my commitment to helping others succeed. My children had largely stopped trying to contact me. except for occasional legal inquiries through David's office. Sarah had apparently consulted with 2 more law firms, hoping to find someone who would tell her what she wanted to hear. All confirmed what she already knew: my decision was final and legally unassailable. Through Mrs. Park, I learned that Michael had actually contacted the Korean Educational Foundation directly, offering to work something out if they would talk sense into his mother. The foundation politely declined to interfere in family matters, but Mrs. Park told me privately that his offer revealed how little he understood about Korean values of respect and dignity. Jennifer had taken a different approach, sending me a letter filled with childhood memories and photos from happier times. "Remember when I was 7 and you taught me to make kimchi," she wrote. "Remember how proud you were when I won the spelling bee. I'm still that same daughter who loves you." But the letter also revealed that she still didn't understand. She wrote about loving me despite my cultural quirks, about hoping I would get over this Korean phase, about wanting our relationship to go back to normal. She saw my reconnection with Korean identity as a temporary aberration rather than a return to my authentic self. The most profound change came in my relationship with myself. For years, I had felt torn between 2 worlds, never fully Korean enough for Korea, never American enough for America. Now, I understood that the conflict had been artificial. I could be fully Korean and fully American. These identities enhanced rather than diminished each other. I had spent 30 years trying to earn my children's acceptance by minimizing who I was. Now I was learning to accept myself completely, Korean accent and all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 1 year after I had changed my will. The envelope bore the official seal of Seoul National University, and inside was something that made my heart soar: the announcement of the first Angela Kim Memorial Scholarship recipients. 20-3 students had been selected from hundreds of applicants. Their photographs showed young faces bright with hope and determination. Their essays, translated into English for my benefit, spoke of dreams to become doctors, teachers, engineers, and social workers. Each one understood that education was not just personal advancement but a responsibility to serve their communities. Min Jun, age 19, wrote, "This scholarship will allow me to study medicine and return to my rural village as a doctor. Mrs. Kim's generosity teaches me that success means helping others climb the same mountain you have conquered." Sujin, age 20, planned to become a teacher in underserved areas. "I will teach children that being Korean is something to be proud of, that our culture produces people like Mrs. Kim who succeed through hard work and never forget their responsibility to help others." Reading their words, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: the deep satisfaction of creating meaningful legacy. These young people would carry my values forward, multiplying my impact far beyond what money alone could accomplish. My children had made one final attempt at reconciliation the previous month, appearing at my door together for the first time since the revelation. They had prepared what seemed like a carefully rehearsed presentation about family forgiveness and the importance of keeping wealth in the family. "We've been thinking," Sarah said, her lawyer's voice carefully modulated, "maybe we could work out a compromise. You could still donate to Korean charities, but maybe keep some of the inheritance for us. We are your legacy too." I listened politely to their proposal, which involved splitting my estate 50-50 between the Korean Foundation and themselves. They had even researched Korean cultural concepts like filial piety to support their argument, though they mispronounced the Korean terms and clearly didn't understand their deeper meaning. "I appreciate you coming," I told them when they finished, "but my decision is final. You are my biological legacy, but the scholarship recipients are my spiritual legacy. They understand that true success means lifting others up, not just accumulating wealth for yourself." They left disappointed but not surprised. I think, deep down, they had known it was hopeless. As I write this, I'm preparing for my second trip to Korea, where I'll meet this year's scholarship recipients in person. At 60, I'm finally living as my authentic self: proud Korean woman, successful American businesswoman, bridge between 2 worlds rather than stranger to both. My mother's ring catches the morning light as I write, and I can almost hear her voice: "Angela, you finally learned what I tried to teach you. Your identity is not something to hide, it's something to honor." The Angela Kim Educational Foundation will outlive me, supporting Korean students for generations to come. These young people will never be ashamed of being Korean. They will succeed because of their heritage, not despite it. That's the legacy I choose to leave.